The first sentence in that diary made me set it down, walk outside into the cold November air, and stand in the dead grass for 10 minutes, just trying to remember how to breathe. 7 words. That's all it took. They will come for me before spring. I didn't know who wrote it. I didn't know who they were, but I knew the way you know things in your gut before your brain catches up that whatever was buried inside those walls wasn't meant to stay buried. And the moment I pulled that box free from the concrete, I had made myself part of a story that began long before I was born. I just didn't know yet how close it would come to ending me. Chapter 2. A fresh start in a dead, quiet town. My name is Ethan Carter. I was 28 years old when I bought the house on Alder Creek Road, and I bought it for the same reason most people make desperate decisions. I had nowhere else to go. The divorce had been finalized in March. The apartment I'd been renting fell through in August. My savings were thin, my pride was thinner, and I was carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent 2 years watching everything he built quietly collapse around him. I needed distance. I needed silence. I needed something that was mine. The listing appeared at the end of September 412 Alder Creek Road, Millhaven, Pennsylvania. Population, 3,200. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a full basement, and a plot of land that backed up to a tree line so dense it blocked out the horizon. Built in 1947, last sold in 1989. Listed as is. The price was startling. Not in a good deal way. In a why is nobody else buying this way. I drove out on a Tuesday morning. The real estate agent, a woman named Donna Price with tired eyes and a practiced smile, met me at the end of the driveway. She shook my hand and said, "It's got good bones." I would later learn that was her way of not saying anything else. The house was gray. Not painted gray, weathered gray. The color wood turns when it's been arguing with the rain for 70 years and losing. The front porch listed slightly to the left. 2 of the upstairs windows were boarded from the inside. The yard was all brown grass and rusted fencing, a vegetable garden plot along the south wall that had long since gone wild. But there was something about it. Standing in that driveway with the October wind pressing against my jacket, looking at those dark windows and that sagging porch, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not comfort, exactly. More like recognition. Like the house and I had both seen better days, and were at least honest about it. I offered full asking price that afternoon. Donna Price didn't look surprised. She looked almost sorry. I moved in 3 weeks later with a truck, a mattress, and a box of tools. The neighbors on the left, an older couple named the Hendersons, waved from their porch when I pulled in. The ones on the right didn't come out at all. That first night, lying on the mattress on the bare living room floor, because I couldn't bring myself to sleep upstairs yet, I listened to the house breathe. Old houses do that. They expand and contract, they tick and settle, they whisper in languages that sound almost like words if you listen long enough. I told myself that was all it was. I almost believed it. I started with the basement. Contractors I'd spoken to during the inspection said the foundation needed attention. 2 sections of the interior wall were showing moisture damage, and there was a stretch along the northeast corner where the concrete had visibly cracked and buckled inward. A full repair job would mean chiseling back to stable material, sealing the breach, and re-pouring. They quoted me something I couldn't afford, so I bought a concrete chisel, a sledgehammer, and a stack of YouTube tutorials, and I decided to do it myself. It was a Saturday, first week of November. The basement smelled like clay and old motor oil, and something sweet underneath that I couldn't identify. A single bulb hung from the ceiling on a cord. I had a work light on a stand, positioned near the damaged wall. I'd been chiseling for about 2 hours when the chisel broke through into empty space. Not a crack, a cavity. I stopped, pulled the chisel back, pressed my hand flat against the wall and felt cold air moving against my palm, slow and steady, like breath. A pocket of air sealed inside a foundation wall doesn't behave like that. Air doesn't circulate inside solid concrete. I worked carefully after that, methodical. expanding the opening instead of hammering blindly. It took another 40 minutes before the hole was large enough to shine a flashlight through. The beam caught metal. It was a box, a rectangular tin, military green, about the size of a large shoebox, with a hinged lid and a simple latch. It had been placed, not dropped, placed on a small shelf of concrete that jutted out from the inner wall. Deliberate. Someone had built that shelf. Someone had sealed that box inside the foundation of this house on purpose. I reached in and pulled it free. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the basement floor, crouched over it, and just looked at it for a moment. The metal was corroded along the seams, but the latch opened cleanly, like it had been oiled recently, though I knew that was impossible. Inside, wrapped tightly in a square of oilcloth and tied with kitchen twine, was a book, a diary. Dark green cover, water-stained at the corners, the spine cracked but intact. No name on the cover, no label. Just the diary, the cloth, and underneath it, folded into a small square, a single piece of paper that I didn't unfold right away. I wish now I had looked at it first. It might have prepared me for what came next. I carried the box upstairs, sat down at the kitchen table under the overhead light, and opened the diary to the first page. 7 words. They will come for me before spring. I went back to the first page 3 times that night, convinced I was misreading it. I wasn't. The handwriting was small and precise, the kind of penmanship taught in schools before everything went digital. Blue ink. The letters leaned slightly forward, like they were in a hurry. I turned to the second page and started reading. The diary belonged to a man named Robert Halsey. He didn't introduce himself on the first page. That line was a conclusion, not a beginning, but by the 3rd entry, his name had appeared twice, and I had started to piece together who he was. A civil engineer. A quiet man by his own account. He had moved to Millhaven in the spring of 1971, bought the house on Alder Creek Road from the family of a widow who had died intestate, and planned to restore it slowly over the years while he worked at the county planning office. His early entries were ordinary. The cost of lumber. Arguments with a hardware supplier. A neighbor named Garrett who kept letting his dog dig under the fence. He wrote about loneliness. In the straightforward way, lonely people write not complaining exactly, just cataloging the silence. Then, in an entry dated the 14th of October 1971, something changed. I found the first mark today, on the basement wall, behind the old water heater. A symbol carved into the concrete, not painted, like someone used a nail or a chisel. I don't know what it means. I almost photographed it, but something stopped me. I don't know why I'm recording this. I set the diary down and walked to the basement. The water heater was new. It had been replaced sometime in the 80s, based on the installation date stamped on the housing, but the wall behind it was original. I moved the heater 6 inches from the wall and shone my flashlight into the gap. The symbol was still there, a circle with a vertical line through its center, and 3 short horizontal lines crossing the vertical like a spine with ribs. It had been carved with something sharp, pressed deep into the concrete. I stood there in the cold basement light, staring at it for a long time. Then I went back upstairs and kept reading. Over the following weeks of his diary, Robert Halsey documented his growing unease. Strange sounds from the tree line at night, not animals, he specified. Structured sounds, the kind made deliberately. He began to notice vehicles he didn't recognize parked on Alder Creek Road at odd hours. He found 2 more symbols around the property. One beneath a loose board on the back porch. One scratched into the inside frame of the storm cellar door. He asked questions around town. Casually, he wrote, trying not to alarm anyone. When he mentioned the house on Alder Creek Road, conversations ended. People changed the subject, with the efficiency of people who had been changing that particular subject for a long time. One entry, dated the 3rd of November 1971, made me feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Asked Henderson today, the old man, not the son, whether he knew the family that lived here before Margaret Whitlow. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd leave those walls alone if I were you. He walked inside before I could ask what he meant. I didn't sleep last night. I looked at the date twice, then I grabbed my jacket, walked next door, and knocked on the Hendersons' door. Robert Halsey had found it 3 months before he disappeared. The clues had accumulated across 40 pages of diary entries, measurements that didn't add up, a wall in the basement that sounded hollow when he knocked along it, a discrepancy between the architectural drawings filed with the county and the actual interior dimensions of the house. He had been an engineer. He measured things for a living. "The south basement wall is 11 inches too thick," he wrote. "I've checked it 6 times. The exterior foundation at that wall is 12 inches thick. The interior face sits 17 inches from the same baseline. There are 28 inches of space unaccounted for. Either I'm making an error, or there is a room behind this wall." He had found the entrance, but hadn't written down how to access it. 3 entries later, he wrote only, "I know how to open it." "I'm not writing that here." Then he described what he found inside, and his handwriting, which had been precise and controlled throughout, began to tremble. "I searched for 4 days. I knocked on every inch of that south basement wall. I measured and remeasured. I pulled up the old shelving unit bolted to the wall and found nothing. I checked the floor for seams. I was about to conclude that Robert Halsey had been losing his mind when I noticed the electrical outlet. It was the only outlet in the basement, installed low on the south wall, a foot above the floor. But when I traced the wiring back to the breaker panel, there was no circuit that corresponded to its position. It wasn't connected to anything. It was never an outlet. It was a latch. I pressed in on the left side of the plate cover and felt something give a mechanical click deep in the wall. A 3-foot section of the wall, framed by 2 barely visible vertical seams I had taken for settling cracks, swung inward 6 inches. I pulled it open. The room was small, 8 feet wide, maybe 10 feet deep, with a ceiling low enough that I had to duck my head. It smelled of old paper and something chemical, like developing fluid. There was a wooden workbench along the far wall, and above it, covering nearly every inch of the back wall, were photographs, dozens of them, pinned in overlapping rows, black and white, some yellowed with age, others crisper, different eras, different cameras, but all taken in and around Millhaven. They showed men in meetings, men exchanging envelopes, men standing at construction sites, pointing at things, signing documents, and in many of them in the background, sometimes partially cropped, but always present the same face. Lean, gray-suited, watchful, Leonard Carver. On the workbench were folders, documents, land transfer records, county zoning filings, contracts for public works projects, going back to 1948, and newspaper clippings carefully cut, meticulously dated. 3 of them referenced the same event, the construction of the Millhaven Water Treatment Facility in 1952, a project that had gone massively over budget, whose primary contractor had declared bankruptcy 2 years after completion, and whose project, overseer a county official named Dale Pruitt, had resigned abruptly in 1954, citing health reasons. Dale Pruitt had not had health problems. Dale Pruitt had been paid to disappear. The documents made it plain. Leonard Carver had operated a network of influence in Millhaven spanning nearly 2 decades, rigged contracts, bribed officials, land acquisitions that preceded public projects by suspicious months. He hadn't just known where everybody was buried. He had buried several of them, metaphorically, and, the last folder suggested, in at least one case, literally. A man named Thomas Greer, a county auditor, gone missing in 1961, never found. Robert Halsey had assembled all of this. He had found the room, cataloged everything inside it, added his own research, and then sometime before March of 1972 he had sealed his diary in the foundation wall, perhaps knowing he wouldn't get to finish what he'd started, perhaps knowing what was coming. I sat in that small room for a long time, reading by flashlight, understanding slowly what I was holding. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. The land records went through county offices that still existed. The families named in those documents still had people in Millhaven. Carver was long dead. I found an obituary from 1987, a natural death in Florida, but the network he had built had outlasted him. These things always do. I photographed everything with my phone. Then I sat back on the cold concrete floor and exhaled slowly. And that's when I noticed the oilcloth packet taped to the underside of the workbench. It was the same material as the wrapping around the diary, same kitchen twine, but it was smaller, just a single folded piece of paper inside. I almost didn't open it. I had enough. I had more than enough. My hands were trembling slightly as I unfolded it, and I told myself it was the cold. It wasn't a note from Robert Halsey. The handwriting was different, larger, less controlled, and the paper, I could tell, even in the dim light, was newer. Not 1,972 new, much newer than that. At the top, in pencil, was a date, 3 years ago. If you found the diary, you found this room. That means you're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which I was yet. My name is Caroline Reyes. I was a graduate student in local history at Penn State. I came to Millhaven in 2021, researching the water treatment scandal. I found the house listed as abandoned. I broke in. I'm not proud of that. I found the room. I found everything Halsey documented. I also found something he didn't know about, a second set of documents that Carver himself had hidden here, separate from Halsey's materials. I've taken those with me. I need you to understand something. The auditor, Thomas Greer, didn't disappear. He was killed. I have the proof. And some of the men named in those records, their sons, their nephews, they still hold offices in this county. One of them is currently a state representative. I tried to go to the press. I was told, very politely, to stop. I'm writing this because I'm leaving Millhaven tonight, and I don't know if I'll be able to do anything with what I know, but I couldn't just leave this room sealed and empty. Someone else needs to know. The diary is real. The crime is real. Robert Halsey disappeared because he got too close. Please be careful. Please be smarter than both of us. Che R. I read it 3 times. Then I sat in that hidden room under that house on Alder Creek Road, surrounded by 70 years of buried truth, and I made a decision. Chapter 9. What comes after? I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had the name Caroline Reyes in 4 different search engines, her academic profile at Penn State, a research paper she'd published in 2022 about mid-century municipal corruption in rural Pennsylvania. She was real. She had listed, in the paper's footnotes, a reference to anonymous primary sources obtained in the field. The paper had been published in a journal with a modest readership. Nothing had come of it. I called the journalism department of the nearest university with an investigative program. I sent photographs to 2 journalists whose bylines I trusted. I made copies of everything, physical copies, mailed to 3 different addresses before I spoke to anyone local. I also called Caroline Reyes. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting. When I told her where I was calling from, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, very quietly, "You found the room. I found your note." Another silence. "Are you all right?" I looked around my kitchen at the old walls, the narrow windows, the house I'd bought, because I had nowhere else to go, and I thought about what it meant to start over, in a place that turned out to have history running through its foundation, literally. "I think so," I said. "I think I need your help." She drove up from Philadelphia 2 days later. We spent a week working through everything together, cross-referencing the documents with county records accessible online, building a timeline that was airtight enough to hand to people who knew what to do with it. The state representative whose family name appeared in Carver's files resigned 4 months later, citing personal reasons. The press release about an ongoing investigation into historical county procurement records was buried on page 7 of the regional paper, but it was there. Thomas Greer's family was still in Millhaven. His granddaughter was 43 years old and had grown up knowing her grandfather had simply left one morning and never come back. I sat with her at her kitchen table on a cold January afternoon, and I told her what we had found. She wept. Not from grief exactly, she had done that grief long ago, from something more like relief, from the particular exhaustion of an unanswered question finally, after 60 years, getting its answer. As for Robert Halsey, the man who had hidden that diary in the walls of a house he knew was watching him, we found a record of a man matching his description, who had crossed into Canada in March of 1972 and settled in a small town in Ontario under a different name. He had died in 2009 at the age of 74. He had lived a quiet life. He had never come back. I like to think he would have been glad someone found it. I still live in the house on Alder Creek Road. I finished the basement repairs. I sealed the hidden room not with concrete, but with a proper door, because it felt wrong to bury it again. I keep it empty now, clean and dry, the workbench gone, the photographs preserved in archival folders and stored somewhere safe. Sometimes I go down there and just stand in it for a minute, thinking about the men who built secrets into the walls of this place, the man who hid them, and the man who cataloged them, and the woman who left a note in the dark for whoever came next. The house doesn't feel haunted. It never did, really. What it felt like, from the very first night, was heavy, carrying something it couldn't put down. And now, maybe, it's a little lighter. So am I. I came to Millhaven to escape a life that had stopped making sense. I found instead a story that had been waiting in the walls for someone willing to finish it. I don't know if that's luck or purpose, or just the strange way that the world sometimes hands you exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. What I know is this: truth doesn't disappear when you seal it in a wall. It waits, patient and cold, and absolutely certain that one day someone will come along with a chisel and too much time on their hands. And when that wall finally comes down, everything inside it comes out into the light. Every single thing.